And now I'm going to turn this Transitions Academy over to Angela Gerberding. And I think if you have worked with ICAPS, you know Angela. She is the self-proclaimed ICAPS queen. Actually, she didn't proclaim that. We proclaimed her that. And she has worked tirelessly to build ICAPS programs in Illinois. And she is going to talk to you about policy on ICAPS and Bridge students. So thank you, Angela. Take it away.
Sure. I was going to say, there was not a lot of self-proclaiming in that one, but I did proudly wear the crown, and I will have it on at the cohort combos next week as well. So one of the things we wanted to talk about briefly was policy around ICAPS and Bridge students. And one thing I want to clarify, because I know we have both adult ed and CTE staff on this meeting, is when we talk about Bridge students, we're talking about adult education Bridge students. I know the term Bridge is used all over campuses all the time, and I just wanted to clarify that the Bridge students that we are talking about today are the ones attached to adult education programs. So from that, if Sarah will move me forward. So that's the agenda. I mean, we're going to talk about those 5 different things, but we'll just go ahead and jump right into them. So in FY23, looking at NRS data from the adult ed side of things, we had 926 students identified as ICAP students. That's a good number. However, a third of those credentials that were earned by students could not be counted on the NRS performance report, and that's for a variety of reasons. But when and we'll get to that in just a second, but when we can't count the credentials, it also impacts future performance for funding at the program level. And so we want to make sure everybody is able to count everything at the local level, so you all get credit for the amazing work you're doing. We're able to count it at the state level, so we get credit with the federal group for the great work that we're helping you be able to do. So one of the questions is why so few credentials were able to be reported. Some of it is data entry. Students were in an error status, and if they're in an error status, they don't count for anything. Sometimes what we heard was that there was confusion about what goes where in DAISY, so they're not marked as ICAP students, or they're not marked as completed, or what does this look like? What does this mean? And then also what even goes into DAISY? You know, what should we be including? And what's the difference between Bridge courses and ICAP students? So we're going to get into we're going to touch a little bit on those pieces. Next slide, please. So how are Bridge students identified in DAISY? Bridge students are identified by the course that they are enrolled in. So when you go into a course and you're building a course, this is the screen that you'll get in DAISY, which is on the adult ed side of things. Where it says, is it the Bridge course, yes or no? Mark that as a yes. And I'm pointing at my screen because I know none of you can see it, but I'm pointing at it anyway. So where it says yes, that's how these students get counted. So then as you enroll students into the course, they all show up as Bridge students. Next screen, please. And this is the rest of that same page. So you've still got to fill in your units of instruction, your instructional categories, your PCS codes, and then you've got down at the bottom your job skills, citizenship, born ID, or math only. For Bridge classes, you're probably only going to be marking the job skill. You might do some math only, but for the rest of those, the majority of your Bridges are job skills. And then you hit submit. And then, as I said, as you add students into this course, that's where your Bridge numbers come from. Your Bridge students are identified that way. All right, next screen. So then the question is, how are ICAP students identified in DAISY? They are identified by student. So Bridge students are identified by the courses they're in. ICAP students are identified as an individual student. When you go into DAISY and you go into the status page, there's a question about ICAP students. When you click yes, the entry date comes up, and then down at the bottom, you have to plug in sector information. Then when the student leaves the ICAPS, that's where they would be exited. Now, exited is leaving. Could be they got a job. Could be life happened and they had to drop out of class. Could be that they completed and finished. So exited is that broad picture of leaving the course. However, the next question says completed ICAPS. That's what has to be marked in order to be counted in the NRS reports. So what may have happened is some of the programs marked students as exited, but not completed. And if they did actually complete, what's the difference? Well, the difference is the exited is your broad leaving reasons, your completed is they made it all the way through the training and they've completed. Okay, next slide. So completed, sorry, I was checking the chat real quick. Completed ICAPS students should have a credential attached. They're not required to, but we have said that ICAPS should be leading to an industry credential. So if they are completed, they should have a credential. And you do that on the goals achievement tab. And again, you go in, you select the pathway, the credential, the date they earned them, and then you would hit submit. However, if you don't see a credential that you're looking for, that blue print is a link, hyperlink, and that is a form that you would fill out that comes to me. I then take a look at it and make sure it's industry recognized. If it's somebody, I'm gonna pick on Sarah for a minute, Sarah's beauty salon, well, that's great, but is it industry recognized? Is everybody gonna know whose Sarah's beauty salon is? If not, I'm gonna have issues with making that an industry recognized credential. So you just plug in that, like when you plug in that career pathway and information at the top, you then have the option, if for whatever reason you plugged somebody into the wrong credential, you can go in to delete them and add in the correct one. So there's ways to fix this. But again, these have to be included in order to be counted. Okay, next slide. So what are the requirements for FY24? Because we were looking at FY23 trying to help remedy some of these things. So in FY24, all ICCB adult education funded programs must run a Bridge and an ICAPS in FY24. And in order for these to count as run, these must be identified by students in DAISY. So if you don't have any Bridge courses that have students in them, that doesn't count as running it. If you don't have any ICAP students identified as ICAP students, that doesn't count as running them. So, I know sometimes the question is, well, what if my program just chooses not to do it this year? Okay, well, first of all, it's a grant requirement. So that's your choice, but it is a grant requirement. So it could result in a corrective action plan or reduced funding, which are not good. But additionally, it can be a lack of demonstrated effectiveness for the next composition cycle, meaning you didn't do what you were supposed to be doing, and that could mean not being funded at all. Now, we're not throwing that out there to be scary, but that is a reality. If programs are not meeting grant requirements, it does show a lack of demonstrated effectiveness, and that impacts that next round of application cycles in the competition year. So again, we're not trying to scare anybody, but the reality is you have to run these. So, and if you need help figuring that out, talk to Sarah or Tara or Amy or Brittany and I, and we will help you figure out how we can get this done. So next slide. So what about students from other funds? And this is a question that comes up quite a lot. What happens when somebody else, I've got a different grant, I've got other money that wants to run these. Should I plug them into DAISY? Should I not? How does that work? Okay. If you need to enter students into DAISY from other funds, other than adult education literacy funds, you need to use funding codes 4900 and 4910. So what's the difference? 4900 is for unrestricted funds. For example, institutional dollars. 4910 is for other restricted funds. So those would be other grants from ICCB or other outside sources, because again, those are restricted in what you can use them for. But note, everything about adult education eligibility and NRS assessment policies apply because you're plugging it into DAISY. DAISY has the requirement of a pretest. DAISY has the requirement of adult education eligibility. So like we heard from Michelle, who was doing at Joliet Junior College, who was doing a phlebotomy, ICAPS 2, she had funding from a different grant. She could plug those into DAISY using the 4900 because they were adult education students. So we're able to count those students, we're able to count those credentials, we're able to count those completers, but just with a different funding source. So let's walk through a couple of these examples. Next slide, please. I've got two scenarios. One, I didn't want to pick on anybody particular, so I'm calling myself out on this one. Convening Academy receives an Innovative Bridge and Transitions, which is commonly known as the IBT grant from here at ICCB. GA plans to use these funds to build a welding ICAPS. The IBT grant is going to pay instructors for their planning and creation time and for the support course. So when GA, which by the way is an adult ed funded program, I didn't mention that on here, enters students into DAISY, the funding code would be 4910, other restricted funds, for same example that I gave with Joliet. Other funds goes into 4910. Second example, Convening Academy receives money from their foundation to pay for their healthcare bridge to be used as a pipeline for the Academy's pharmacy tech program. When GA builds the bridge course in DAISY, the funding code would be 4900, unrestricted funds, because the foundation probably is a little bit looser with the way you can spend money. So that's the unrestricted piece of it. Again, pre-testing is required for both of these scenarios because pre-testing is required by DAISY. It's not an adult ed grant versus an IBT grant versus foundation money. It's DAISY that's requiring the pre-test because you have to know where the students are. You have to do an assessment for them. Hopefully this has helped clarify some things. 4900, 4910, those are two different ways that you can plug in other funding sources of students into DAISY. Next slide. Student eligibility for adult education. A lot of this is the same information many of you have heard, but I know we've had turnover, so we wanted to hit it one more time. Students have to be 16 years of age or older. They are not enrolled or required to be enrolled in secondary school under state law. They are either skills deficient, so below the 9th grade level in math or reading, or they do not have a secondary school diploma or its recognized equivalent, or they are an English language learner. Those are your adult ed requirements for student eligibility. Next slide. Rupa and I are going to do, this says Kathy, because Kathy, Rupa and I, we'll put it that way, are going to do a deeper dive into some data from FY23 and what can we help you do in FY24 to improve your data during one of the breakout sessions at 10:30. So again, like I said, this is going to be very top level, very brief, but if you're interested in more of that data information, come find us at 10:30 for the breakout session. All right, next slide. So today, similar to what everybody else has already said, please go listen and learn for the rest of the day. Take away classroom ideas, DAISY input suggestions, tons of resources that are going to be shared today, and connections to other programs and people. But first, we're going to take a bit of a break. We have to transition to our conversation with an employer. So take this 5 minutes maybe to go refill your coffee, play with your dog or cat really quick, stand up and stretch, and then come back in 5 minutes and we're going to get restarted on the same Zoom link. Is that correct, Sarah? We're on the same link?
That is correct. Thank you, Angela, for sharing that. And before you walk away to go get that cup of coffee or to pet your dog or to stretch, let's make a quick, Angela talked about a session at 10:30. So let's have a quick review of the agenda for today. So we've already had your welcome, your recap of FY23, and Angela giving you some policy information and some ways to input the good success that you have in DAISY, which is the Adult Education Data Management System. And when we come back, as Angela said, we'll be having the conversation with some employers, which will be very interesting. And that will be, so that'll be, then after that, we're going to take a break. Remember, I told you earlier, we're going to have break time. So you'll be able to go check the email and do the other things that you need to do. We're going to have a breakout sessions later this morning. So at 10:30, we'll come back and have 3 different sessions. You can choose one to go to. All of the sessions are recorded today, so don't worry. You can go back and hear everything that was shared for all the different sessions. Then we'll have a lunch break, and at 12:30, Dr. Amy Julian and I will be sharing resources because, as I mentioned before, this is a year-long event. We have tons of resources for you, so we want to share that and walk you through some of the ways that we can support you. And then this afternoon, we'll have another breakout session. Will be 3 sessions. You can choose one. And then we'll come back to this main general area for a recap at the end of the day with Angela and Ann Story from ICCB. And yes, I am going to say Angela wasn't self-proclaimed. We proclaimed her the ICAPS queen. So I want to clear that up. So that takes you through your agenda, all of those sessions. If you got into this session, you were probably at that agenda on the ICAPS website. You feel free to still share that link with anybody you want to, because people can still attend, even if they didn't register. We want to get as many people this important information as possible. So feel free to share that and go back to that agenda to link into all the other sessions throughout the day. So now we're going to take that quick break while we transition to the conversation with the employers.
And they can leave their link up, right?
Right, for
So
sure.
just
We're going to
go
stay live.
mute yourself, whatever, go get your stuff, come right back.